Muy buenas tardes. This is a San Diego Concilio commentary. I'm Dr. Patrick Velasquez, the co-chair of the San Diego Chicano Latino Concilio on higher education. The document that I'm holding is the final report of our San Diego Concilio on the status of Chicanos, Latinos in higher education in San Diego. We've been working on this document for about a year and a half now, and it is now February 2023, and our final report is concluded. What you will find in this document is a report on how we see Chicanos and Latinos doing in our local public colleges and universities in San Diego. And what we did was to spend a considerable amount of time gathering information and data from the 11 public colleges and universities in San Diego County. For those that may not know, there are 8 community colleges, including college districts, credit-bearing college campuses in San Diego, and 3 credit-bearing 4-year universities that are public. So these 11 institutions were the subject of our report on, again, the status of Chicanos and Latinos in higher education in San Diego. We divided our report into 6 areas that we think will show us some evidence, a good snapshot of the institutional conditions and priorities that our students and faculty and staff face in these local public institutions. The first area we looked at was the issue of leadership and mission. We wanted to see to what degree Chicanos and Latinos are reflected and represented in the leadership of these public institutions. Keeping in mind that the benchmark or the standard is that Chicanos, Latinos make up about 35% of the population of the county of San Diego, about 40% of the state of California, and some of these institutions are to serve the entire state. And we also make up about 55% of the school-age children or students in the state of California. And we also wanted to find out to what degree equity and a priority on Chicanos and Latinos is reflected in the institutional mission of these institutions, of these colleges and universities. And you're often able to see that by their strategic plans and their other documents that attest to the priorities of those institutions. So what we found in the way of leadership and mission is that there's very little evidence of an institutional commitment to equity and so-called Hispanic serving institution status. There was very little representation of Chicano Latino leadership, raza leadership in these institutions. At UC San Diego, there is absolutely none. At San Diego State, we have a provost and a president that are Chicano Latino, but the numbers of Chicano Latino decision makers other than those 2 are very small at San Diego State. We didn't find any evidence of Chicano Latino leadership at Cal State San Marcos, and our people are underrepresented in the leadership of the 8 community colleges, the credit-bearing community colleges, except for Cuyamaca Community College. Southwestern College and Palomar College have Latino presidents, but again, for the most part, we are largely absent from the decision-making structures. And again, we found very little evidence, at least that was provided to us, of a priority on our community in the institutional mission of these colleges and universities. The second area that we looked at is enrollment. To what degree are these institutions accessible to Chicano Latino students? We found that there was an acceptable level of enrollment in most of these institutions. And again, keeping in mind the benchmarks that I mentioned earlier. The exception again was UC San Diego, where only 20% of the undergraduate students are Chicano Latino. And there's no commitment to becoming a so-called Hispanic serving institution, which means an enrollment of at least 25% Chicano Latino students. We found it interesting that there's evidence, documents institutional documents at both UC Berkeley and UCLA that set a specific date when those institutions will become Hispanic serving institutions. Again, that is, they will reach this undergraduate enrollment of 25% Chicano Latino. We see no evidence of any target date, any priority, or certainly any plan by which UC San Diego will reach that status at any time this century. We also look, the third area, at student success, because it's not enough that our students are able to enter the door of these higher education institutions. They need to encounter conditions that facilitate their success and make their priority a success. What we found was an uneven level of success and an uneven level of priority on helping our students to be successful in these institutions. UC San Diego provided us with no data on how our students are doing, although we know that historically Chicano Latino students at UC San Diego have lower graduation rates, lower first year retention, and lower GPAs than white students. At San Diego State and CSU San Marcos, respectively, we found small gaps in outcomes, but largely our students there are doing well. In the community colleges, we found very few gaps in first year retention. Again, our students are doing about as well as white students are, the most privileged students. We found very few gaps in graduation rates, but we did find consistent differences in lower rates of course completion for Chicano Latino students in these community colleges. Now, there's a scholar that we respect a great deal in the United States named Gina Garcia, who has written extensively about Chicano Latino success in higher education, including in these so-called HSIs, or Hispanic serving institutions. Dr. Garcia talks conceptually about something called liberatory outcomes, which is not only helping Chicano students to graduate with a solid GPA and perhaps matriculate to graduate or professional schools, but also that they experience these liberatory outcomes, that they develop a consciousness of who they are as Chicanos and Latinos. They develop a strong ethnic identity, and that they develop a commitment to their communities and to social justice. What we found is that almost none of these local institutions, public higher education institutions, show any evidence of facilitating the acquisition of these liberatory outcomes among our students, which is very disturbing as a finding. Another important area we looked at in our report is that of raza faculty. We know the incredibly powerful and positive impact that Chicano Latino faculty can have on our students in these institutions. What we found is that the representation of Chicano Latino faculty is low at virtually all these institutions, despite the importance in the scholarly literature of Chicano Latino faculty to raza student success. UC San Diego's representation was absolutely deplorable, and we need more raza faculty in all these academic areas, including STEM, where we found them largely absent in San Diego. Another important area was curriculum. What kind of courses, again, are our students taking? Where do they have the opportunity to access courses in Chicano Latino studies, ethnic studies, or biliteracy? What we found again here in this area was that UC San Diego was woefully inadequate. Some of the institutions in the local area are just now developing ethnic studies, such as CSU San Marcos and Miracosta Community College. San Diego State is more of a positive example of a full Chicano Latino Studies department that has added additional faculty, Chicano Latino faculty. The conditions that we find in our local community colleges are that there are few Chicano Latino faculty in the field of Chicano studies or Latino studies or ethnic studies. Most of the departments are small and inadequate. And there's a very serious issue of an over-reliance on adjunct or temporary faculty in some of these programs. The sixth and final area that we looked at was the issue of law enforcement. And I would encourage you, or even challenge anybody who's listening to this, to Google police brutality against Latinos. If you think that racist law enforcement is only an issue for the African American community, which it surely is, you're wrong, because it's a very powerful and serious issue, not only historically, but in contemporary times for the Chicano Latino community as well. This goes back, this police brutality, racism in law enforcement against Chicanos and Latinos, goes back at least to 1973, to the police murder of 12-year-old Santos Rodriguez in Texas, all the way up to 2019, to the murder of Angel Hernandez here in San Diego by Metropolitan Transit System cops. Again, that was in 2019, several months before George Floyd was murdered by the police in Minnesota. So we know that if there's a track record of racist law enforcement and police brutality, also by the Migra, by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement against Chicanos and Latinos, then it's probably going to be manifest on college campuses as well. At least we need to be attuned to that. We need to look into that and see if there's evidence of that in our local colleges and universities. So we asked the three public universities in San Diego to provide us evidence about this one way or another, as well as the 8 credit-bearing community colleges. Instead, the local colleges and universities refused to provide data and information on their law enforcement. They did not show us any policies or practices of anti-racism, nor did they show us that they're not wasting tax dollars that are instead needed for instruction and student support. We saw some numbers indicating a high degree of expenditure on law enforcement at institutions like the Grossmont Cuyamaca Community College District, and about $8 million spent locally in the San Diego Community College District on law enforcement. The conclusion of this report that we compiled by our San Diego Concilio is a set of recommendations for these local institutions. And we encourage you to read our final report. We also have some recommendations for local legislators, because ultimately our California Assembly members and state senators, particularly the ones here in San Diego, need to hold these local institutions accountable. We are paying millions and millions of state tax dollars every year to support institutions like UC San Diego that are ignoring our community, that are hostile to our community, that are not accountable to our community. And some of these other institutions locally are not doing what they need to do in order to serve a population that makes up 35% of San Diego County. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We will continue to engage these local institutions in dialogue. We will continue to push for the necessary changes that our community deserves. And nothing else will be sufficient to prepare our Chicano Latino youth for a future here in the United States of America. This has been a San Diego Chicano Latino Concilio on Higher Education commentary. Mil gracias.